Imagine running through a freezing Siberian forest, terrified that an unseen killer is right behind you. It is August 1993. Valentina Utochenko crashes through the dense underbrush of the Khamar-Daban mountains. She cannot hear the wind. She only hears the echoing screams of the people she just left behind. Minutes earlier, she was part of a robust, 7-person hiking expedition. Now, she is alone. There was no bear, no avalanche behind the wipeout of this group. It came from within. Their eyes bled. They tore at their own throats. They were banging their heads against the rocks. Valentina keeps running, desperate to escape an unseen massacre happening in broad daylight. But surviving the mountain was only the beginning of a much darker mystery. 6 days earlier, the expedition began in perfect spirits near the pristine shores of Lake Baikal. Lyudmila Korovina, 41, led a group of highly capable hikers into the wilderness. Beside her walked Alexander Sacha Krisin, 23, Tatiana Filipenko, 24, Denis Shvachkin, 19, Victoria Zalesova, 16, Timur Bapanov, 15, and Valentina Utochenko, 17. They were traversing a popular, supposedly safe route. The August air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the pines like spun gold. For days, they hiked across the ridges, sharing rations and foraging for medicinal golden root. They operated like a well-oiled machine, thoroughly prepared for the elements and excited for the journey ahead. Until the sky turned black, and a seasoned leader made a choice that still baffles experts today. On August 4th, an unseasonal Mongolian cyclone slammed into the region. Freezing rain lashed sideways, rapidly turning into a blinding snowstorm. You'd think the danger would be managed quickly. Just drop down into the tree line where the thick timber provides natural shelter, or push 30 minutes forward to a known emergency platform equipped with dry firewood. But Lyudmila Korovina did neither. She ordered the group to pitch their tents on an exposed, barren ridge near Retranslator Peak. They had absolutely no cover. They were completely defenseless against the howling, high-velocity winds that battered their campsite. It was a fatal miscalculation that set the stage for an unimaginable horror. Morning broke on August 5th. The night had been a relentless nightmare. Brutal winds had ripped the rainflies from their tents, leaving everyone soaked to the bone and shivering in the freezing temperatures. Recognizing the peril, Lyudmila Korovina ordered an immediate descent. They hastily packed their ruined gear and moved down the slope, desperate to reach the safety of the forest below. But suddenly, Alexander Sacha Krisin stumbled. He dropped to his knees, clutching his throat as if choking on invisible water. Blood began pouring from Alexander Krisin's ears and nose. He frothed at the mouth, his eyes wide with unearthly terror. He collapsed onto the wet stone, convulsing violently. Lyudmila Korovina screamed for the others to keep moving down the mountain and threw herself over him, frantically trying to stabilize his condition. But his spasms were uncontrollable. Within moments, he was dead. As the remaining hikers stood frozen in pure, paralyzed shock, Lyudmila Korovina looked up. Her face twisted into a mask of absolute agony. The invisible killer had already claimed its next victim. Lyudmila Korovina clutched her chest, foaming at the lips, and collapsed dead. Panic instantly shattered the remaining group. Tatiana Filipenko sprinted toward the rocks, gasping for air. But she didn't just fall. She began violently smashing her own head against the jagged stones. Timur Bapanov and Victoria Zalesova started tearing at their own clothes, frantically ripping off layers in the freezing wind. It was a domino effect of biological horror unfolding in real time. They were physically dismantling themselves in a matter of seconds. Only 2 people were left standing, watching the madness unfold. Denis Shvachkin and Valentina Utochenko watched the carnage in absolute terror. Denis Shvachkin grabbed Valentina, snapping her out of her paralysis. He screamed at her to run. Valentina turned to help Victoria Zalesova, but the delirious girl wildly bit her hand. There was no way to save any of them. Valentina grabbed a single sleeping bag and plunged down the steep, snowy face of the mountain. She glanced back just in time to see Denis Shvachkin drop to the ground, convulsing. She scrambled into the dense tree line, hiding beneath the thick branches, listening to the crushing silence. To survive the wilderness, she had to make the most horrifying walk of her life. Valentina huddled in the forest for a full day. When the storm finally subsided, the reality of starvation and severe exposure set in. Navigating the vast Siberian wilderness without supplies was a guaranteed death sentence. She retraced her steps, climbing back up the unforgiving ridge. Cresting the hill, the aftermath of the previous day came into full view. Scattered across the wet stones like discarded dolls, their faces were locked in expressions of profound torment. Moving cautiously among them, Valentina retrieved a map and whatever remaining food rations she could carry, then departed into the wilderness without looking back. It would be weeks before anyone fully understood what she left behind. For 4 grueling days, Valentina navigated the unforgiving terrain entirely alone. Exhausted and deeply traumatized, she finally reached the banks of the Snezhnaya River. By pure chance, a group of Ukrainian kayakers spotted the catatonic teenager and brought her to safety. However, it took 3 long weeks for helicopters to recover the bodies from the mountains safely. The official scene photos are the stuff of nightmares. Yet, investigators found the surrounding area completely undisturbed. There were no tracks, no signs of an animal strike, and no evidence of foul play. But the autopsy tables would only transform a mountain tragedy into a bureaucratic puzzle. When the autopsy reports were finalized, the official cause of death was listed as hypothermia, exacerbated by severe protein deficiency. Extreme cold can indeed cause paradoxical undressing, a delirium where freezing victims feel burning hot and strip. But hypothermia doesn't make people bleed from their ears. It doesn't cause them to foam at the mouth, crush their own windpipes, and drop dead in minutes. Furthermore, the victims had been eating well-rationed meals before the storm, making the protein deficiency claim highly suspicious to experts. The official story was so flimsy, it birthed theories far more terrifying than the cold. Adding to the confusion, the story itself evolved over the years. In Valentina's original 1993 written statement to the police, she mentioned the broken tents and the sudden deaths. However, the most gruesome details, the foaming mouths, the bleeding, the sheer horror movie violence, were allegedly absent from early records. It wasn't until a 2018 interview that these bloody elements were heavily emphasized in the media. Even if the narrative shifted, the simultaneous deaths remained an impossible anomaly. If it wasn't just the cold, what killed them? Some suspect contaminated water from Lake Baikal, an area known for historic toxic waste dumping. Others point to the golden root, Lyudmila Korovina, who actively foraged a potent medicinal plant that local folklore warns against overharvesting. A darker theory points to the sky. Could a stray chemical weapon, perhaps a localized nerve gas, have drifted over the ridge? Nerve agents cause instant convulsions, foaming at the mouth, and rapid death. But if it was a deadly gas, how did one teenager breathe the same air and walk away unharmed? Valentina rarely speaks of those days. The official files remain closed, attributing the massacre to severe weather and poor leadership. But the mountain offers no confessions. Unlike other famous anomalies where hikers perished in the dead of night, these victims watched each other unravel in the morning light. They felt their own minds break before their bodies gave out. The ridge remains silent today, offering no answers to the wind. Sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they are simply in the air we breathe.